Welcome to Just Asia, AHRC TV's weekly human rights program. These are the headlines. Burmese journalists freed. Some 440 election workers dead in Indonesia, families to be compensated. Pakistan's Senate passes bill to end child marriage amidst religious opposition. Thailand's Rights Commission opens inquiry into outspoken commissioner. Calls for enforced disappearances in Bangladesh to be investigated by International Criminal Court. Welcome to AHRC TV's Just Asia. I am Kieran. This week, Just Asia begins with Burma, where two Reuters reporters have been freed by a presidential amnesty. Wai Lone, 33, and Kyaw Soe Oo, 29, spent more than 500 days in prison, convicted under the Official Secrets Act and sentenced to 7 years in jail last September. Their jailing was seen as an assault on press freedom and raised questions about Burma's democracy. The country's de facto leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, was widely criticized for defending their imprisonment. As he left prison, Wai Lone vowed to continue his reporting and said he was excited to return to work at the international news agency.
Inside in the prison and also around the world, people who are wishing to release us. So I would like to say thank you very much for everything. I'm really happy and excited to see my family and my colleagues. And I can't wait to go my newsroom now.
I'm really happy and excited to see my family and my colleagues. I can't wait to go to my newsroom, he told reporters. Both men have families with young children. Wai Lone's wife, Pan Amon, only discovered she was pregnant after her husband's arrest. Reuters editor-in-chief said the reporters, who last month won the prestigious Pulitzer Prize for their work, had become symbols of press freedom. Next, Indonesia has seen the death of 440 election staff due to exhaustion, while another 1,878 staff are ill. After working long hours on election day, the workers died from fatigue-related illnesses caused by having to count millions of ballot papers by hand. Indonesia held its presidential and legislative elections simultaneously on April 17th. It was the largest single-day elections in the world, with the government spending $1.7 billion on organizing it. According to Indonesia's General Election Commission, the KPU, the independent body that organized the election, a total of 7.4 million election officials were hired to maintain more than 820,000 polling stations scattered across the archipelago country. Many of them were located on difficult terrain with no road access. Officials often had to transport the ballot boxes on foot. Most of the dead are freelance workers hired to work between April 10th and May 9th. After much urging by civil society, the General Election Commission has agreed to compensate the victims' families. Commission Secretary General Arif Rahman Hakim said a compensation fund of 40 to 50 billion Indonesian rupiahs, and that's 2.8 to 3.5 million US dollars, has been prepared. The KPU will finish vote counting and announce winners of the presidential and parliamentary elections on May 22nd. Moving to Thailand, the country's National Human Rights Commission is conducting a disciplinary inquiry into outspoken Commissioner Aung San Suu Kyi. Aung San has repeatedly spoken out about Thailand's pressing human rights problems under the military. The Rights Commission began its inquiry on April 30th, accusing Aung San of political partiality. The inquiry was triggered by comments from a junta-appointed legislator and a complaint by a pro-government activist. The inquiry focuses on Aung San's role in observing legal proceedings and documenting rights violations against opposition politicians and government critics. She faces possible impeachment. Once considered a model for national human rights bodies in Southeast Asia, Thailand's National Human Rights Commission has faced interference from successive Thai governments since 2009. Due to government manipulation of the Commissioner's selection process, in 2015, the Commission's global ranking was downgraded from A to B. Furthermore, the 2017 AHRC Act stripped away the agency's independence and transformed it into a de facto government mouthpiece, contrary to the UN Paris principles. Next, Pakistan's Senate has voted to end child marriage despite opposition from religious parties. The Child Marriage Restraint Bill, raising the age of marriage for girls to 18, has now to pass through the National Assembly and then the provincial levels. Human rights activists welcome the vote, saying child marriage increased rates of death during childbirth and increased poverty and illiteracy. While the 1929 Child Marriage Restraint Act sets the legal age of marriage for boys to 18 and 16 for girls, it is rarely enforced. Islamic law is usually invoked to say any girl who had gone through puberty was considered an adult and fit to marry. Religious parties claim the new bill, which punishes child marriage with 3 years in prison or a 100,000 rupees fine, is against Islamic law. According to Senator Sherry Rehman, who proposed the bill, a Pakistani woman dies in childbirth every 20 minutes, partly because of health risks from young pregnancies. The UN Population Fund says marriage robs girls of their childhood and future prospects. Girls who marry are less likely to finish school and are at greater risk of domestic violence, abuse, and health problems such as harmful complications from early pregnancies and sexually transmitted diseases. In Bangladesh, enforced disappearances have been a growing phenomenon under the government of Sheikh Hasina since 2009. The Asian Legal Resource Center, AHRC, has been raising the issue of enforced disappearances to the United Nations Human Rights Council for several years. The AHRC argues that administrative, legislative, and judicial remedy for enforced disappearances is neither accessible nor affordable, as Bangladesh's domestic institutions have collapsed under the authoritarian regime. The latest report of the International Federation for Human Rights, the FIDH, concludes that enforced disappearances in Bangladesh constitutes crimes against humanity. The report illustrates how Bangladesh's government has used enforced disappearances to silence members of the political opposition and dissenting voices. It has urged the international community to take all necessary measures to fulfill the rights of victims to truth, justice, and reparation. Enforced disappearance is defined as a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute. Bangladesh, being a party to the Rome Statute, comes under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, for affording justice to the families of disappeared victims. For more information, Just Asia speaks to Mohammed Ashrafuzzaman, liaison officer at the AHRC and ALRC.
Enforced disappearance has been a very serious problem in Bangladesh under the incumbent government of Sheikh Hasina. Since Sheikh Hasina assumed to the office in January 2009, enforced disappearances started increasing in every year. And right now, over 500 people have been documented, the victims of enforced disappearances, while the undocumented victims would be 3 times more than this figure. International Federation for Human Rights, which is globally known as FIDH, has recently published a report titled Vanished Without a Trace, and they have focused the cases of enforced disappearances. So in this report, they have exposed that Bangladesh police and intelligence agencies, including Rapid Action Battalion and the Directorate General of Forces Intelligence, DGFI, are directly involved in committing the crime of enforced disappearances. The victims have been identified as the political activists, mostly affiliated with the opposition parties, and also citizens of various professionals. At the same time, they have exposed a trend and pattern of the enforced disappearance, that it involves arbitrary arrest and detention, and then incommunicado detention and complete disappearances of the victims, and in several cases fabrication, detention of the detained disappeared persons, and they have been later found in prisons under fabricated charges, trumped up charges, and in most cases the charges are brought by the law enforcement officials. So in this report, there is one thing that they have focused on, is that enforced disappearance is a crime against humanity under the international law. And here it is relevant to the reports that Asian Legal Resource Center and Asian Human Rights Commission have previously published in various written statements and reports submitted to the United Nations International Independent Experts. And we have also raised this issue that it's crime against humanity, and Bangladesh is a party to the Rome Statute, and that's why the International Criminal Court should initiate prosecution, preliminary examination, and formal investigation into the allegations of enforced disappearances so that the perpetrators could be brought to justice, because there is no resort to go within the domestic institutional setup of Bangladesh within its boundary. The local domestic judicial institutions are completely collapsed. It doesn't work for the cause of upholding justice or administering justice to the victims. So for this reason, the International Criminal Court should apply its mandate to provide justice to the victims.
That is all for this episode of Just Asia. For more on these and other issues, please visit www.humanrights.asia or www.alrc.asia/justasia. Thank you for watching and see you next week.